Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Chad Musick, Chief Data Officer of Bellroy. And Bellroy is an Australian brand that makes carry goods such as bags, wallets, and other accessories. They're known for their design-focused products made with sustainable materials. I've known Chad for a little while. He's a mathematician, an engineer, and a data and analytics guru. He has a very interesting background, which we'll obviously hear about on this episode today. And his perspectives on AI are grounded in mathematics, which we will also explore in this episode of A Tale of Two AIs. As usual, we'll also explore a range of topics at the intersection of software engineering, AI, and the future of enterprise applications. So welcome, Chad. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And I must mention, Chad is based in Tokyo, so we're doing this recording in the evening in Boston and fairly early in Tokyo. But I'm curious to hear a little about your background at Bellroy. Just tell us a little bit about the company and your role at the company currently.
Sure. Bellroy makes carry goods, and it's a term that they helped to define as something unique. So, when people talk about everyday carry, it comes from Carryology, which is owned by Bellroy and from Bellroy. And, my role there, I joined Bellroy about 5 years ago as their data engineer and helped them integrate kind of external systems with internal ones. And since then has gotten a couple of promotions. They seem to think I do all right. And now I'm the chief data officer, where I'm responsible for most things data. And that can be a little bit fuzzy because data, it does touch so much in every business and every system. So we handle everything from automation to machine learning and AI, and, act as a support for the business, but also as a kind of generator of ideas of things that the business could do.
Awesome. All right. So 5 years from data engineer to the chief data officer. We'll get into that because I'm sure a lot of folks would be curious on that particular journey. But before we get there, I'm curious about Carryology. What is that? Can you describe it a little bit? It sounds very interesting.
Sure. Carryology is a community, and I think it's largely on Facebook, of people who are carry enthusiasts. They are interested in everything that can carry things. And Bellroy, I think Bellroy owns it entirely, but is mostly hands-off. So my experience with Carryology has been entirely as, an observer on that. So I don't contribute to Carryology directly. They're independently managed. And I think I don't know enough about the internals of it to say.
Something that I should at least go and check out because just the term itself seems very intriguing. So I need to check that out.
I know that when Bellroy does collaborations on products with Carryology, that we have to prepare for a surge of data on the days that those are released.
Interesting. All right. So you've got some amazing fans, basically, and as you mentioned, carry enthusiasts that are part of the Carryology community. Awesome. So tell us, give us a little bit of your background, career progression, how you arrived at your current role, obviously in the not just at Bellroy, but as an engineer and a mathematician when you first started. Just you have an unusual and a very interesting background. I would love to hear a little bit about it.
Sure. So I started in the early 1990s by failing a year of university because I got too heavily involved with MUDs, multi-user dimensions or multi-user dungeons, which were online text gaming. What that did was it taught me how to program because you could do that on there. So after my year of doing that instead of going to classes, I had friends on there who were also programmers, and they said, you're actually like a lot better than many of the professionals that we deal with. We will kind of stake you to move here to Silicon Valley. So I moved from Alaska to Silicon Valley, got a few jobs, did pretty well on this as a software engineer, did well enough that afterward I could go back to school. And I just had a lot more discipline and focus having worked in a few startups and things. And now you know that the discipline and focus that it takes to be in a successful startup. And yeah, I went to community college, which is great. I recommend it to anybody who's in doubt. And then from there, got accepted to Berkeley, went to Berkeley, and then decided with my wife and our son to move to Japan. So we moved here to Japan, and I continued my education online at Texas A&M, where I did computational mathematics, focusing on computing and how to make computers do mathematics and applied mathematics as well as possible. And then to my PhD program at Nagoya University, where I focused on low dimension topology and complexity theory with a postdoc in graph theory. And all of those end up, well, not so much the low dimension topology, but the complexity, the computation, and the graph theory end up being really useful for computing and for AI and data generally. Then I spent some years working in the translation and editing industry, doing kind of editing of academic papers. Martin Shkreli, the famous pharma bro, had the same sort of job, and you can find his opinions on it. But for me, it was good. I got to read, I think, about 1 million words of things that I edited, which is about the length of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. So yeah, that was fun. And then I started as the data engineer at Bellroy. So about 2 years later, they had promoted me to chief data officer. I have a lot of certifications because I enjoy them, but the one that's probably most relevant is that I am a certified data management professional at the master level. And so it goes over data governance and understanding data and using data in business. I think that's kind
Very,
of,
very cool. Yeah, very cool. So tell us about the kinds of things you did as a data engineer to get you to the CDO role, because you must have done some pretty remarkable things at Bellroy.
I think it's more about the kind of directions of choice. As a data engineer, we've got great data engineers now who are really good at what they do. I was always focused on what more can we do? So while I was building kind of ETL pipelines, I was thinking, what can we do with these? How can we use it? How can we apply and expand? So one of the things that my mathematical background taught me is how do you generalize problems and how do you look at problems from another thing? So I worked on knot theory specifically, and it's all very abstract and fun. That's abstract makes me it's fun. But you take basically a piece of string and you put it into 3-dimensional space, and you can knot it up so that you can't ever make it a circle. But if you go to 4-dimensional space, it can't be knotted up. And this is kind of a metaphor for problem solving, which is where if you're looking at the problem really locally, it might seem insolvable, but if you abstract it a little bit, suddenly it becomes really easy to solve. And I find this is the case with data. If you say, right, we're going to build a database table, it's going to have these columns, and that's how we're going to get our data. You get locked into a solution rather than looking at what problem are you trying to solve. You say, right, this is a problem we're trying to solve. And then I think that the reason that I got the kind of promotions is one, Bellroy is growing. It's triple the size that it was when I joined. And the other is just the constant focus by me on abstraction and expansion. So I'm good at the really short-term stuff, but I enjoy the longer-term stuff of what's happening, what can we do, what problems are we solving, and what problems should we be solving.
Most technical folks, they have a lot of difficulty going from the concrete and localized version of the problem that they're working on to be able to abstract it out and get it a lot more generalized and look at the problem much more strategically.
I think the questions to ask are why and what are you going to do with it? And it can seem a little bit obstructionist as first. If people come to your team, if people come to your data team and they say, we need data points A, B, and C. And you say, why? They're like, well, because we want them. Right? But why? Well, how can we build a dashboard if we don't have them? Okay, but what are you going to do with the dashboard? And I've talked about this and I've written about this. And like, if you have a dashboard that you're going to look at once a month, you don't need a real-time data flow. Because what are you going to do with the difference between the data now and the data 10 seconds from now? Is it focusing on the why, the what are you going to do with the utility of the thing really helps bring value to the business and get not regarded as a cost center. So I think as soon as you're regarded as a cost center, you're in a defensive position where you're trying to justify your existence, you're trying to justify your role, rather than being a generator of ideas and a refiner of ideas. So I'm probably a better critic than I am an inventor. If you want me to invent something, I'll do all right. But if you invent something, I could tell you all the things wrong with it and possibly all the things that you could expand it to do. So it may be relevant to mention that I went to business school and had management experience before Bellroy. So that probably factored into being able to go in 2 years from data engineer to CDO. As I had previously been an operations manager for another company. I have a formal business training.
So in some ways, yeah, diversity of experience also matters, right? Because business is very much usually about thinking in more strategic terms, more abstract terms, compared to the actual implementation, which is much more of a technical and engineering challenge usually.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Roger Martin, I forget, he's at a Canadian university. He writes a strategy column called Play to Win and talks about, if your strategy is a set of goals of things you're going to do, that's not a strategy, that's a plan. That strategy is looking at what untapped opportunities are out there. What could you be doing that nobody else is doing? And so I think that we'll probably get to it later. Like LLMs are fantastic. I've been using one for a while. What they will tell you is kind of the expected thing. So if you're looking to an LLM for your strategy, you're going to have the same strategy that everybody else has. And maybe you're in a space where you're number 4 or number 5. And that's what you want, is you want to just improve on that same strategy and rise up in the ranks. But if you want to be number 1, you really need to have something that is novel and is beyond that. It could be really helpful to know what the average is. So this is where, like, when I'm doing kind of abstract mathematics, I'll take something very concrete. One of the papers that I worked on, was taking, 300 concrete things and doing a lot of computational work on them. Then abstracting that is the next step. And that's the step where you get to ideate and vision and to convert that noun and kind of just plan for the future and plan for a really hopeful future.
Very cool. Very cool. I guess I want to double click on and explore what you just described in the context of AI, because you mentioned LLMs,
Yeah.
and obviously a lot of our conversation is going to be around AI. So how do you utilize the focus on the concrete and being able to generalize and translate that into the strategy for the business in the context of AI? Because pretty much every organization out there currently is thinking about, okay, well, this is really interesting technology. Yes, it's got, lots of limitations, but it has amazing potential as well. And the technology continues to improve by the day. So everyone's thinking about, okay, well, how should we apply it? What will it help me do? Without really giving a lot of regards to the limitations. So I'm just curious how you think about that problem.
I think about it in terms of utility first. So if I'm saying, right, this LLM is fantastic, I can use it to replace a worker that I'm paying $10 an hour. Okay, well, That's a value, but it's a $10 an hour value. And, I'm not a fan of putting people out of work. They could acknowledge that using AI, even in a company that doesn't lay off anybody, is going to result in probably fewer hires in the future. That kind of looking at the utility and saying, right, AI can do away with minimum wage work. I'm like, okay, sure, yeah. And we don't need telegraph operators anymore either. I think in terms of like my role in particular for software engineering, we've seen over the past 60 years, and I haven't been around to see all the past 60 years, the kind of change from, writing in machine code directly to writing in assembly to writing in C, which is where I started out, to these higher level languages. And AI seems like a higher level language. Thing about that is that these higher level languages have pitfalls and kind of traps. And, in C, you'd have like, null pointer dereferencing as a thing that you didn't have in assembly. Because as you move up to these more abstract layers, you get more problems. So if the utility of the AI is that it needs to be 100% correct every time, well, probability tells us there's no such thing as 100%. Yeah, I took a class on rational choice theory, and the professor on the first day, he said, okay, show of hands, who would come to class tomorrow if I told you there was a chance you would die coming to class? Nobody raised their hand. He said, there's a chance you'll die coming to class tomorrow. It's small, but it's there. And so you've got to acknowledge that probability is never 100%. AI is never going to be 100% accurate. But if you're putting it against people, they're never going to be 100% accurate either. So it's like, a John Henry kind of thing. If you go back to the, American mythology is, him competing against the steam engines. But we can say, right, this area is critical that we make as few mistakes as possible. And so what we're going to do is we're going to keep it human. For some problems, this actually works pretty well. For some things, you want to put an AI and put a human checking it. I would not want the people at the nuclear power plant, Japan is nuclear power, to be kind of looking into the reactor tank to see if everything is going all right. I want instrumentation that turns it into insight. And I think this is where I see the most value in AI, is it's just a more sophisticated kind of instrumentation. And so it can give us insight. And sometimes just like automating a data flow, we can say, this is reliable enough that I'm going to build an automated process on top of this. I'm going to set some guardrails where a human needs to intervene and make a decision, but it's just a tool. So I don't think we're at the point where AI can replace people, but it is going to put some people on the path to a different career.
And that is just an inevitability with any kind of major technological change or improvement. I think that is something we just all have to acknowledge. I was reading this article about just what kinds of productivity gains we should expect from AI. And there is a professor at MIT that I follow, and his and his students, their conclusion was that the productivity gains, at least in the near future or the next 5 to 7 years, are going to be fairly slim. And so it remains to be seen, like you said, as a tool where it ultimately gets deployed and employed, and where the utility is not quite as much based on the fact that the accuracy, not just that, it's the technology is not fully accurate, but it just the behavior is a little unpredictable. So the unpredictable nature of AI just makes it not very suitable for certain applications, right?
And I think too, there's a bias toward people and toward this idea that we can control variability better with people. So if let's say, one of the first places I worked was McDonald's, is I've got 20 people on staff at McDonald's, and one of them is having a bad day and just goes off on a customer, just absolutely explodes. But You can kind of discipline that employee. You can retrain them. You could dismiss them and hire somebody else. And you've lost one of 20 people. Now, if the AI is acting on and it's all of your labor, then you're suddenly faced with all of your labor being unpredictable at once. And so the normal statistical variation where we can take a lot of data and we can apply, Chebyshev, we can apply central limit theorem and say, right, we're going to have some outliers, we're going to have some mistakes, but on average, we know the variability is going to be this small. If your AI has variability that's this small, you can say this is a problem. And two, you've got people can join a company, and feel free to tell me that I'm one of these people. People can join a company and surprise you with like unexpected skills, just be way more than you were hiring for, and you benefit from that as a company. Or they could be way less than you're hiring for. With AI, the limits of it are pretty well known, and we discovered new limits and new ways to push them. But you don't ever get those surprises in either direction. And so you can't build on positive variability. You suffer from all the negative variability that you can't build on the positive. So that can make it a little bit tricky to kind of go all in on AI, especially if you know that by relying on AI, let's say you're a company that your entire thing is we're good at prompting AI. Well, I am building a business. I can prompt AI for 3 hours a week and build fantastic value. You might find your competitors willing to work for 5 hours a week and outdo you. So it can be tricky to build kind of differentiated services and products on it.
Makes sense. Ultimately, it's a question of having another tool in the tool chest. And if you think about AI way more than that, then it could lead to some disappointment and perhaps outcomes that are less than desirable.
I live down the street from Toyota, and Toyota has done a lot of innovation in management and manufacturing and things. In manufacturing, you really want the differences between outcomes to be as small as possible. Yeah, you want every car that you make to be exactly the same if it's supposed to be exactly the same. But in most of our businesses, we want that occasional lucky accident. Toyota is not going to produce a car that gets 1,000 miles to the gallon when every other car on that production line gets far less than that. But you can sometimes get that in other things by kind of focusing on upside and limiting downside.
Makes sense. So let's let's switch gears a little bit. We talked about AI. I'm curious to see what are some of the really interesting problems or use cases your team is working on that you can are comfortable sharing.
Yeah. I think what we're working on is providing the best customer experience. And so what this means is both immediate, like with customer service. So every email is answered by a human at Bellroy, and we don't have plans to change that, but the humans use tools for this. And so using AI to enable them to kind of conform to a certain tone, a certain expectation, look things up quickly. A lot of this could be done by building systems. And this is where the kind of variability comes in. I had a conversation with one of the founders, and it was, do you want to use AI to build, let's say, 10 kind of subpar applications that can just mostly get it done? Or do you want to just tell people they can't have those unless they are willing to wait 6 months for you to build the perfect application? And when you introduce human judgment in, they could look at an output that's less than optimal and say, no, we're not writing that crazy thing. We're going to write this instead, but generating that. And I found this for myself. I can generate kind of boilerplate things and then figure out where I can add the value. So that's one way we're using AI is our customer service to generate some responses, to check over things, to do automated translation of emails so that people can email us in any language. And that's kind of improved over the last few years. Another place that we're using it is in our logistics and fulfillment. So We do a significant amount of machine learning in deciding how much stock we want to put in different warehouses around the world, which kind of reduces the carbon footprint of moving things around. If we are sending a plane from Australia to every place, well, FedEx is plane, but it's kind of getting air shipments, that's less ecologically friendly and less financially friendly than being able to put things on a boat and send them and have them where you need them. So Amazon has done enormous amounts of work on this with AI. We're not at that level because we don't have that volume of shipment, but we're using the same kind of idea of, can we get the things to the right places at the right time so that we have the kind of minimum last mile distance.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And so it's interesting. You talked about a more of a Gen AI use case
Mm-hmm.
in terms of generating responses to emails, and you talked about a more traditional machine learning type of a use case where you're predicting demand and optimizing your distribution network and your inventories at various sites,
Yeah. And we're
right?
using
And
Gen AI in our engineering teams too. So I'm, using Gen AI every day, and other data scientists are using it. And we're using that as, it can help. One use case that we've seen is that a lot of our people in data science, all of them at the moment, I don't want to pretend we're bigger than we are. We've got two. Both of them came in as kind of very heavy R programmers and very familiar with that and comfortable doing statistics there, and switching them over to use Python so that they have other tools available has been really speeded up by Gen AI, because you can tell it, here's my R, what does this look like in Python? And it can just spit out mostly the correct thing. So you still got to know what you're doing and say, that doesn't look like what it should look like, but it can really speed up the process of learning. And so it's an interesting case for us where we're seeing Gen AI being a tutor. Like when I was a tutor during school, I didn't always know the subjects I was tutoring, but I knew how to understand what was written and explain it in a way that the student could take it. So if I was tutoring chemistry, which I'm not fantastic at, we'd look at the book together and help them understand what the book was trying to teach them. And Gen AI is doing that for us now.
and for your data scientists, I'm curious to see, obviously Gen AI is helping kind of get the skill sets of the data scientists, more in line with where you would want it. So moving from R to Python as an example. But how do you see the role of data scientists evolving in this new era? Because there's a false notion, and maybe I'm just, leading the witness in some ways, but there's a false notion that, data science is dead now that we're in the world of Gen AI. But curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I think that saying data science is dead now that we're in the world of Gen AI is accurate as saying data science is dead now that we have pandas, or data science is dead now that we have calculators. It wasn't called data science, but something you said earlier made me think about all the bookkeepers who were put out of work by accounting software. And, it's a matter of tools. So if the primary value of data scientists is that they can sit there and type or click to say, I'm going to try this thing and see if it improves the model if I lag it by 1 period. Nope. How about 2 periods? If that's the value that you're getting from your data scientists, 1, they're stagnating, and 2, you're not getting very good value, because the value of a data scientist is that they are trained in looking at these problems and saying, here's the shape of the problem, and here's the shape of what the solution is. And can I reshape either one of those by altering what I'm taking in, by taking in additional data, by supplying additional output? So I think that Gen AI can be kind of a very quick prototype for this, where you say, instead of the data scientists spending their time typing or, using a UI to test out 20 different ideas for what features they could include in a model, you could have Gen AI generate 200 of these and this is going to speed them up. So I think that data scientists should ultimately be decision makers and explorers. And if you explore something more quickly, but just as thoroughly, you get a lot more done. Now, if you take let's say a bicycle to explore, you're going to get more terrain covered than if you're walking. And if you have something that you keep track as you're going and say, this is interesting, pay attention to it, then I think that's better. I operate on a principle of vigilance is exhausting. And so we want to notice when things are unusual. And I think that Gen AI can really help with this. Data scientists don't have to be vigilant about testing everything. Instead, they can test a whole bunch of stuff at once using Gen AI to assist them and notice the unusual, notice the value.
I really like the, your line of thinking, and I think this is something that every data scientist out there should be considering. So instead of thinking about, okay, well, how do I just train a particular model, what algorithms should I be learning, and how I should be shaping the data, and what kinds of feature engineering would be interesting and helpful. They should really be thinking about, okay, how can I use this set of tools in a much more automated way and ultimately be able to iterate much faster, because that's going to get the right result, as opposed to, as you said, walking instead of taking a bike or driving a car around to cover as much terrain as possible, right? Yeah. And so, we talked about data science a little bit, but you're an engineer by training and you're building applications, you're heavily involved in applications at Bellroy as well. How's application development changing with Gen AI, and what are the design patterns emerging in this sort of new era?
So I see a couple of them emerging, and some of them I like and some of them I don't, but they're both emerging. I want to acknowledge them. That I'm literally one of the graybeards that's supposedly keeping, the younger generation out. So I see one is that things are iterated really quickly and they're tried out and they're discarded if they don't work. And then you worry about efficiency and total correctness later. And to me, this is almost like an entrepreneurial spirit, where if you try and build the perfect business by making no mistakes as you build it, everybody else who's willing to accept a little bit of kind of inanity or inefficiency is going to beat you to market. They're going to beat you in the market because it's not about having the best product. It's about being the most fit for the market. And so I see Gen AI being used by people who aren't necessarily software developers or engineers to generate this. In Bellroy, we have people who say, right, data team and the technology team, they haven't gotten to my problem. And my problem is this, that I have this spreadsheet and I wanted to do this. So they use the Gen AI and it says, sure, here's 500 lines of app script that you can use to make the sheets do it. This is not great app script. It's very kind of random, middle of the road app script. But if it works, they've solved the problem. And if they solve the problem, eventually everyone in the company is using it and we start seeing cracks in it. Then it's easy to say, right, this thing has proven its value from the Gen AI basis. It's worth taking this and perfecting it. I was in Melbourne and my wife and I were walking along and we noticed this kind of path through the grass. And it was just, the grass was dead because obviously everybody had walked there rather than walking all the way around the sidewalk. That's kind of a prototype for where you should build your sidewalk. And Gen AI can do this. You see what people use it to build, and it doesn't matter as much whether it's perfect. What matters is that it's useful. This goes back to utility. And you say, okay, everybody else has already established that there's great product fit here. Let's build a better product. So this is one way that I see it being used. The other way is by engineers, and it's just almost like reinventing these languages as a higher level language. So you go from C to C plus, and whether that's an improvement is up for debate, but you go from, C and Java, you go to Python, and this is that it's easier to develop in, but it's easier to make a mess in. And I think this is where Gen AI can sit on top of a language like this, and it becomes easier to develop in, easier to make a mess in if you don't know what you're doing. But if you do, it can give you kind of fast iteration on average things to let you focus on the extraordinary.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's what we're seeing as well, is all of these different coding tools and AI tools are making good programmers much better
Mm-hmm.
and definitely helping, more junior programmers get better as well, but not at as fast a clip as making good programmers and really good programmers much more productive and extraordinary. So we shall see how the space evolves. So let me ask you, you know, as you're immersed in the space, in the data and AI space, and there are other both technical as well as business leaders trying to figure the space out as well. What advice would you give them to stay ahead of the game?
I think I'd probably tell them, I might piss off some people with this, but on LinkedIn, if somebody has AI in their name, and that's not the only, like if they don't have a focus on a particular area of it, that it's like hiring a business consultant. They might have great ideas, but they're not going to be there when you need to implement it. So understand what it is that you are kind of bringing on board and understand how deeply embedded it's going to become. Using an AI, assistant for coding, if a better one comes along, I can instantly switch. It's different than building a critical business process on top of it where it becomes embedded. And if something better comes along, I'm kind of stuck. So I think doing that. Another is just focus on getting people to buy in because people are far more tolerant of mistakes by other people than they are of mistakes by AI. So if you don't have kind of metrics, if you're saying, the AI makes a mistake 2% of the time here, it costs us 2% on top of the actual cost of running it in mistakes. People say that's terrible. You say, well, people cost us 4%. And they say, well, but they're only human. So I think you got to kind of really make a social case for the use of AI and understand that there's going to be reluctance and resistance. And some of it is not irrational. I think this is a mistake that a lot of AI proponents make, is they say, you're being irrational about this because the average on this is different. A little bit of business kind of background makes some of us reluctant to accept that one single metric can classify this, because you say, okay, the average is better, but what's my value at risk? What's the variability here? How expensive a mistake is it going to cost me? There's still, you can still find the conversation with Google Gemini where Gemini tells the user, you should kill yourself, like very directly. As a human, you don't bring any, like, it's just really awful. And this is out there and it's going to stay out there. And it's a negative thing that the AI did. And you can't kind of explain it away and say this person was having a bad day, their dog had just died. It's something that's part of the tool and it's kind of an unacceptable outcome of the tool. So just kind of
Yeah,
know where you're vulnerable to that.
yeah. And the challenge really is, the negatives of the AI get really amplified because, to your point, the AI is going to replicate itself way faster than human beings will. And so if you have the same problem now replicated across all of your agents or all of your interactions with employees or customers, you've now really amplified the problem. And it's not an isolated one-off, but it could just spring up in so many different locations and so many different interactions that the compound effect is going to be just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah. There's a saying that I heard a long time ago before I was even aware of AI, which is if you take a barrel full of sewage and you add a spoonful of wine, you have a barrel full of sewage. And if you take a barrel full of wine and you add a spoonful of sewage, you have a barrel full of sewage. So it
Yes.
is kind of this, idea that the negatives definitely will be more focused on. If it's correct 10,000 times and very wrong the one time, people are going to focus on that one time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, Chad, what excites you about 2025? What does your, reading roadmap, your AI roadmap looks like? And, nothing very specific about Bellroy, but, just in general, when you see some of these technology developments happening, what's what are the two or three areas that you index on very heavily
I am
and
real.
are betting on?
I'm really excited about visualization tools. So about tools that can take a large corpus and visualize it and show us kind of interesting features of it so we can focus on those and also show us where we're not seeing things, where there are gaps that we would think would be there. So this is really exciting for me. The automated coding tools are exciting for me, but also a source of kind of trepidation. So we talked earlier about, how it can help a experienced program a lot more than a junior one. So I do kind of worry about the pipeline for training. So there's a big gap between junior and senior. And if you make that gap harder, I think that's going to come back and we're going to regret not focusing on that. So I'm excited about tools that try to fill that middle. I'm excited about using GenAI for learning, not just for code generation. I think the third is I'm just excited about, the improvements that can be made by different techniques. So I'm really excited about the techniques that are coming out from mathematics and from other things. Google's DeepSeek. I haven't played with it. I'm not endorsing it, but I'm excited by the approach to combine kind of strict rules along with GenAI to come up with reasoning models. And really impressed by what I have seen of the ability to sometimes pull out and know exactly what I'm going to type because it's seen 3 examples and it knows what that 4th example will be. Yeah. And because I've done this before, when the 5th example is just the 4th and it tells me I should repeat this 18 more times, I'm like, no, we're going to short circuit here. We're going to start over with something new. So I think I'm excited to see what people do in this space with learning, with teaching, with helping people to do more than just type. So yeah. And for me, I'm a very visual person. So the visualization tools are really exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chad. Really appreciate you jumping on, and I know it's still early in Tokyo, so I appreciate you spending the time with me on a Friday morning. It's it's been great. All of our conversations are really intriguing over the past few months, and look forward to having some more down the road.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great.